In the early 1980s, young women in and around the state of Connecticut were disappearing without a trace. Their families were left in the dark about their loved ones' final moments.
I assumed it was probably related to drugs or something like that. I was not prepared for a serial killer.
After several missing persons were reported, police finally had a lead. Witness descriptions of a man in a car stalking a woman sparked a statewide manhunt.
The detectives start with one case, and then they find another case, and they begin to join the dots.
Police found a car matching that description, belonging to a man named Michael Ross.
The way he appeared, he was tall, very thin. You wouldn't think Michael was capable of this.
Because he was just like the guy next door. Like, he didn't give off that vibe where you would be tentative about maybe getting into a car, befriending him.
Despite his unassuming demeanor, Michael Ross was revealed to be one of Connecticut's most prolific offenders, as gruesome details about his sexual sadism unfolded.
Each time he would continue to rationalize again, and then as the cravings return, his willpower diminishes and the pattern repeats.
In June 1984, Connecticut State Police were able to track down 24-year-old Michael Ross, the man responsible for the murder of teenager Wendy Baribeau. However, they would be shocked to discover that she was not his only kill.
He led the police to believe that he was probably the person they were looking for, even before they had a sense that that was the case.
Throughout his crime spree, you could see where there was that escalation, right? He started raping women, and then it did turn into killing them.
Ross was sentenced to death in April 2000, the first man in Connecticut in over 40 years to be given such a punishment. The decision to execute the serial killer sparked controversy, but his victims' families were just relieved to see justice served.
Supporters on one side of the road, the others, they're driving down, it's wrong to kill people, he deserves it. There was just so much give and take on it.
I don't care what they would have done to him. Either execute him or let him live the rest of his life in prison.
Regardless of his fate, Michael Ross's senseless killings would haunt his victims' loved ones forever.
If he would have adjusted his radio and drove by her, she'd be alive. If she turned around because she forgot her purse at her boyfriend's house, she'd still be alive. That is what haunted me from the time I found out it was opportunistic killing.
This killer's story begins on the 26th of July 1959 in the small town of Brooklyn, Connecticut. Much of what we know about Ross's childhood came from his own accounts. Michael Bruce Ross was the eldest of 4 children and didn't have the smoothest of upbringings.
Ross was brought up on a chicken farm.
He grew up in a home that, whether he realized it or not, the parents weren't getting along.
Ross was raised in a relatively troubled family. His mother had some psychiatric issues, and she left the family to go and be with an old flame. And as a result, his father would find her, bring her back, and psychiatrically hospitalize her.
Even when his mother returned from hospital, the family dynamic failed to improve.
There were concerns that his mother and his father were in some ways, whether intentional or not, emotionally abusive.
She wasn't very affectionate. She didn't really bond very well with Ross.
Mother's in and out of institutions, and I think he was beaten by his parents.
At the age of 8, Ross was made to work on the chicken farm. One of his jobs was to wring the necks of ill and deformed chicks.
There's strong evidence that this environment was impacting on Ross because he started to have some of the signs very young that we would associate with somebody whose mental health is getting problematic.
It sounded like an absolute horrible upbringing. I think his family was so broken.
So it's hardly surprising by the time he gets to the age of 12, he becomes violent himself.
As Ross reached puberty, his behavior took a dark and sinister turn.
Ross started to struggle with sexual deviance at a very early age.
He's caught molesting a young girl. His father responds really badly to this and beats him and then takes him to the doctor, kind of saying there's something wrong with you. The doctor thinks there's something wrong, but he also says, well, this is nothing to worry about, really. He's starting to go through puberty.
Some of that behavior was frowned upon and looked at as deviant by his mother. So his mother would not approve of this behavior, and she would shame him and humiliate him.
I think simply punishing him in a very stern physical fashion was not going to be helpful. That kind of punishment isn't going to erase any kind of unusual sexual urges he's having. And then when seen by a professional to simply say, in effect, there's nothing to worry about, I think also was not the proper way to address this.
Despite this worrying behavior, Ross was able to progress into a model student and graduated high school in 1977. He then set his sights on New York and got accepted into Cornell University to study agricultural science and economics.
If you have that kind of opportunity to go to an Ivy League school and you're that bright, some things that I read that his IQ was like 155 or something. So that's extraordinarily high. Just because he's smart and he can go to college didn't take away, I don't think, the underlying sociopathic behavior that he had displayed throughout his upbringing.
Ross had several relationships with women whilst at university, and although he started off as the perfect student, his grades began to slip as his sexual impulses emerged once again.
It appears that he had a very strong sex drive, wanted to masturbate frequently with girlfriends, wanted to have sex maybe twice a day, and so on. Some of his girlfriends felt that he wanted sex more than they would have liked, not only because of the unusual and qualitatively different nature of his sexual makeup, but also because in addition to that, he had a very high sexual drive.
21-year-old Ross graduated from Cornell in 1981 and immediately found work in his preferred profession.
He graduated and got a job in Lewisburg. He's still trying to fit into the family business of egg manufacturing.
Ross asked his college girlfriend to leave Cornell and move out to North Carolina. However, she wasn't prepared to make the move.
In one case, when they had an argument, she had pushed him and he slapped her. At that point, she said, if you ever do that again, it's over.
In August 1981, his girlfriend says it's all over. That's enough. Ross, probably upset at the destruction of what he hoped might have been some kind of perfect relationship.
Michael Ross's life was spiraling out of control. After the breakup of his own relationship, his parents were soon divorced. Ross's reaction was to lash out.
On September 28th of 1981, Ross went on a road trip to Illinois and he abducted a woman. This is where we start to see Ross really display his hatred and his misogyny towards women. Something had gone wrong in his life and he decided to take his rage out on a complete stranger.
He not only attacked her, grabbed her, he changed location. He dragged her into a wood.
A neighbor heard the young woman screaming and called the police.
As Ross fled the scene and the police escorted the 16-year-old back home, she spotted his vehicle that was parked on the same street.
She recognizes the vehicle, she recognizes Ross, and is rapidly arrested. What he was effectively charged with was unlawful restraint, and he's only fined $500.
He's treated incredibly leniently. He is treated as if, boys will be boys. And that lenient sentence would have given him the message that he can get away with this. And at some level, he's not abnormal.
Despite the lesser punishment from the authorities, Ross was fired from his job. Nearly 5 months later, he found work at an egg farm in Croton, Ohio. But this fresh start was soon tainted once again.
Ross spotted another young woman. He stalked her, followed her home, knocked on her door, and beat her repeatedly.
Something must have spooked Ross in the middle of this horrible assault, because he ran off and the woman was able to call the police. The police then located witnesses that had seen a man fitting Ross's description and were able to trace him back to his vehicle.
Ross denied the attack, but of course, he couldn't in the long run. She'd identified him. He stands trial and is indeed given 6 months in jail and a $1,000 fine for the attack.
Ross has what we call maladaptive coping skills, and he takes them to the next level. He's incapable of sitting with his distressing emotions, and so for him, it's logical to go ahead and commit crimes in order to make himself feel better, in order to make that pain and that distress go away.
Ross's life was starting to fall apart as his sexually motivated attacks on young women were seemingly escalating with no signs of slowing down. Over in Connecticut, police also had a lot on their plate when they received a call about a horrifying discovery. In June 1982, near Danielson, Connecticut, 23-year-old Deborah Smith Taylor was driving home with her husband when their car ran out of gas.
A state trooper drove the couple to a gas station in Danielson. While they were there, they got into an argument and Deborah decided she was going to make her own way home.
The trooper saw Deborah walk across to a bandstand and accept a ride from a young man, but she'd never make it home.
Her husband reported her missing, but the police had no leads on the case.
Over 4 months later, on the 30th of October 1982, Deborah's body was discovered in a wooded area near Brooklyn, Connecticut, an area located close to a family-run chicken farm.
The body is found in a site quite close to where the Ross family used to dump chicken waste, chicken excrement.
Police made their way to the Ross family farm and interviewed Michael Ross's father and brother. They also interviewed other employees on the farm, but no one there knew of Deborah or knew what could have happened to her.
And at that point, Michael Ross is still in jail for the attack in Ohio.
Despite a promising lead, the case soon went cold. It joined a pile of other cold cases, one of which had begun nearly 10 months earlier in the same county.
In January of 1982, a 17-year-old girl by the name of Tammy Williams was leaving her friend's apartment to make the 3-mile walk home. When she never arrived home, her father reported her missing.
Over 140 miles west of where Tammy Williams was last seen, a young high school student in Montgomery, New York, had also seemingly vanished in March 1982.
A girl called Paula Pereira, who was age 16, left school early because she said she wasn't feeling well. She wanted to go see her new boyfriend. Paula's mother reported her missing to the police. Her body wasn't found for a very long time.
Meanwhile, after a reduced 4-month stint in prison for assaulting a woman, 23-year-old Michael Ross's life appeared to be returning to normality. By May of 1983, he'd got a job at an insurance company in Norwich, Connecticut.
Ross's relationship, which had been on and off with a girl throughout this period, one part of him was trying to create a natural life, normal life, and the other part of him knew that he wasn't in any way normal.
He rented an apartment in Jewett City, and he managed to have a girlfriend, but that relationship began to sour pretty quickly.
In November 1983, a young woman who also worked in the Norwich area had left her boyfriend's house to return home. 19-year-old Robin Stavinsky's family were eagerly waiting to hear if she'd be coming to the family home for Thanksgiving.
Robin was my middle sister's stepdaughter. Her and her half-sister moved in when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade. We grew up in the same neighborhood. We would bike ride, we'd go down to the lake, we'd go out in the boats. There was a constant flow of kids back and forth. Robin functioned more like an older sister. She was 18 months older than me. She would look like just about any college athlete. She was naturally strong, as many of the boys in the neighborhood that tried to cross her found out.
After she left school, Robin had moved in with her boyfriend, but would still come back to visit the family regularly.
I was coming home that Tuesday or Wednesday morning right before Thanksgiving. And my last comment was, everybody coming home for Thanksgiving, you know, have you talked to Robin? Is everybody coming back? And the last thing my sister said to me about that was that she hadn't heard from Robin and the plans weren't set. My sister was concerned that she hadn't responded and that maybe she was in trouble. There was definitely some concern from not hearing from her. It was probably about a week. They lost communication with her. Somebody reported her missing. It could have been my sister or her boyfriend.
On the 23rd of November 1983, 7 days after Robin was reported missing, the Stavinsky family finally got the news that they'd been dreading.
The police called my sister and said, "We think we found Robin."
Robin's body is discovered by a jogger, and she's partially clothed.
They found her in the wooded area. She had been raped and murdered, and they have no clue as to who or why or anything like that. I'm 18 years old. I remember not being able to process it, and I just remember sitting in disbelief for 5 or 10 minutes.
After the Stavinsky family identified Robin's body, detectives were keen to find out who had done this to her.
The first thing they did in this situation was they investigated and talked to her boyfriend, and clearly he didn't do it, right? And so they found that. So, I mean, this thing went cold as ice, like quick. They were working behind the scenes and following up on things, but there was no leads. I mean, there was nothing. There was no media about it. There was no newspaper articles about it. The thing that was the hardest early on was how somebody that was part of your family and you cared about so much could be just kind of wiped off the earth with not a speck of evidence or any kind of suspect.
5 months after the murder of Robin Stavinsky on the 22nd of April 1984, 2 schoolgirls from Griswold, Connecticut were planning a trip to Jewett City. 14-year-olds April Brunet and Leslie Shelley.
Leslie was born December 1st. She was an ordinary teenager. Liked music, was just getting into boys. She was fairly good in school. April was in her first year of high, and Leslie was in her 8th grade. And they used to catch the bus together, and from there it just became a friendship. Either April was down our house or Leslie was up April's house.
The pair had even pretended to adopt each other as sisters, using fake adoption papers. It wasn't uncommon for children at that time to be out on their own.
It was safe. Even Jewett City you would think was safe. There was very little crime. There was a lot of kids around. I had gone to work, and as I was driving up the hill, April was coming down to our house. April said that her mother was going to bring them down and pick them up. My husband at the time didn't realize that April's mother had a 3 or 4 month old baby and a 4-year-old son at home. So there was no way she was going to pick them up.
The girls had actually walked the 3-mile journey to Jewett City by themselves, despite what they'd told both of their parents.
When I got home, I went into Leslie's room, and of course she wasn't there. Les never had done anything like that before. Usually when they said they were going to go somewhere and come home at, say, 9 o'clock, they were home at 9 o'clock.
That same evening, both of the girls' parents called the police to report their disappearances. But the police had no leads.
I couldn't imagine what was going on. Every rumor that April's mother and I decided to follow, it proved untrue. We also had a poster around Jewett City that my husband had made up of April and Leslie's picture on it in a reward.
Just like in the case of Robin Stavinsky, the families were left in the dark about what could have happened to Leslie and April. Had the two 14-year-olds simply run away from home, or was something more sinister going on? It would take 2 months for the shocking truth to finally be revealed, in which time even more teens across Connecticut would vanish into thin air. On the 13th of June 1984, less than 2 months after the disappearances of Leslie Shelley and April Brunet, another young woman in the Jewett City area was reported missing.
A 17-year-old girl named Wendy Baribeau left a note indicating that she was going to walk down to the local grocery store. She was last seen around 4:30 in the afternoon walking on Route 12. When she didn't return home, her mother went out looking for her, and at 10:30 in the evening, she reported her missing to the police.
In the meantime, detectives were beginning to look for comparisons in previous missing persons cases across Connecticut, namely Tammy Williams and Deborah Smith Taylor.
These two girls had a lot of similarities. They had a similar build, they both had dark hair, and they were both last seen in Danielson, Connecticut.
There are no obvious fingerprints on the victims. We haven't got some of the tools that we have now. We are talking about 1984, a very long time before CSI or the Behavioral Science Unit or any indeed of the great innovations in tracing serial killers had happened.
That detective was then assigned to the Wendy Baribeau case before he had a chance to look further into it.
After a 2-day search to find Wendy Baribeau, a fireman discovered her body just a quarter of a mile away from her home in Lisbon, Connecticut. Detectives finally had a lead about what may have happened to the 17-year-old.
A witness claimed that he had seen a car parked on the side of the road and a man following Wendy Baribeau. He heard shouting between the two of them and thought nothing of it, assuming that they were just a couple arguing. But the next day, when he saw Wendy Baribeau on the news, he went to the police to give a description of the man and the car he had seen.
They try and track down cars that look alike, and they come up with a list of cars, and they work methodically down it.
After 13 days of gathering witness descriptions, detectives had a profile for the potential killer.
The police are looking for an attacker who is probably white Caucasian.
A 6-foot-tall male with a medium build, clean-shaven and with dark hair.
Probably in his late 20s or early 30s, and drives a particular kind of car.
The detective asked the vehicle licensing department for a list of similar vehicles and their owners that live locally to Wendy in the town of Griswold. On that list was Michael Ross.
The police turn up at the door of Michael Ross. When the first police officer goes to discuss the case with him, Ross is patently not a suspect.
Ross's car didn't entirely match the description given by witnesses, and the composite drawings didn't include glasses, which Ross was wearing. Police were almost convinced this was not their man.
Ross is not a suspect until Ross says to the detective, well, what if the man who was committing these crimes was to say he was insane? Does that mean he would escape the death penalty? And at that point, the detective realizes that Michael Ross is a great deal different from the way he may appear.
When originally interviewed by one of the police officers, he volunteered the fact that he'd had some other charges against him in the past, something at that point they had not yet known about. The police officer had the sense that maybe Mr. Ross was wanting to give him those clues.
Conveniently, Ross was able to give very detailed accounts of his movements on the day that Wendy Baribeau went missing, but couldn't remember what he did before or after that date.
This would have set alarm bells ringing for detectives, and they asked him to go with them to the police headquarters.
When the officer said that for the sake of the victims, if he'd done this, it would be important that he acknowledge it. And at that point, he didn't ask for an attorney. He simply waived his rights and confessed.
The detectives couldn't believe their luck. They had little evidence to suggest that unassuming 24-year-old Michael Ross was behind Wendy's murder.
Here's a man who was confessing to very serious crimes under circumstances where it wasn't clear at that point that there was even much evidence against him that would be incriminating.
Ross seemed to revel in reliving the crimes that he had committed. He also had quite a narcissistic disposition and a large ego, which I suspect was one of the reasons that he was so willing to confess and willing to talk to the police officers about what he had done.
There's a couple of reasons why this might happen. Now, with some serial killers, they're bragging. They just want to say, yeah, this is what I've done. I'm actually quite proud of it. For others, and Ross might fall more into this category, they're almost relieved that they've been caught because the compulsions and the killing is not necessarily easy for them to live with.
Incredibly, Michael Ross was only just getting started. Not only did the 24-year-old admit to the murder of Wendy Baribeau, but he also confessed to killing Tammy Williams, Deborah Smith Taylor, Robin Stavinsky, and the murder of 14-year-old friends April Brunet and Leslie Shelley.
Leslie and April, they encounter a man who offers them a lift to get home quickly.
Ross had offered to drive April and Leslie to a gas station, but he passed the gas station and kept on driving.
The first thing he does is he takes Leslie, ties her up and puts her in the trunk of the car. Then he attacks April and forces her into the well of the passenger seat of the car.
After killing April, he took Leslie out of the trunk and strangled her. He put her body back in the trunk and began driving around looking for a place to dispose of their lifeless bodies.
Ross takes them back to Connecticut and dumps them in a culvert.
Ross told detectives where they could find the bodies of the two teens. Investigators then had to break the tragic news to April and Leslie's families.
I was at work and my supervisor came up to the floor and told me that there was a detective downstairs that wanted to talk to me. And that's when I found out about Leslie. It was horrible. It was just terrible. And then I had got home My husband got home a few minutes later, and then a different detective came down to question us. It was a nightmare. We were so busy with detectives that you didn't really have time to think. You really didn't. I couldn't believe it at first, that somebody in this quiet town could do something like that.
It wasn't just the Shelley and Brunei families that received the devastating news. Robin Stavinsky's loved ones finally found out what had happened to the 19-year-old athlete.
They have a guy. They think he killed other women. Robin's not the only one, and it's going to be on the news tonight. We were elated. They found him. But the elation was short-lived because it was random. If he would have adjusted his radio and drove by her, she'd be alive. If she turned around because she forgot her purse at her boyfriend's house, she'd still be alive. That is what haunted me from the time I found out it was opportunistic killing. There was no reason behind it.
Michael Ross went into detail about how he spotted Robin walking home alone that evening and offered her a lift.
Ross attacks her, and she passes out. But she comes round and she begins to fight.
Ross tried to strangle her, but Robin was a strong woman. She was an athlete at school and she put up a fight. Unfortunately, Ross eventually overpowered her.
She's dumped, as though she was no more than a piece of garbage.
On the 29th of June 1984, Ross was taken to Norwich Superior Court by police after being charged with Wendy Baribow's murder and confessing to Robin's. Family members of the victims were at the hearing.
As they marched him in, he was thin and had that glasses on, and we were just like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. He killed Robin. Like, I think most of us were in disbelief that Robin didn't kick the shit out of him, to be honest with you. She was a tough girl. He must have either got her down or surprised her, because he did not look like a strong guy to me.
After his shocking confessions, detectives were able to charge Ross with not one, but 6 murders. But there was no time for jubilation. The prosecution had to prepare for one of the biggest murder trials in Connecticut's history. Michael Ross would have to face 2 separate court cases across 2 jurisdictions in Connecticut. The 26-year-old had a plan to avoid the death penalty.
In November 1985, to the murders of Tammy and Deborah in Windham County in Connecticut, Ross pleads no contest and receives a sentence of 120 years.
18 months after his conviction, Ross was back in court charged with 4 murders in the county of New London. For fairness, due to the amount of pre-trial publicity, the case was moved to Bridgeport County. And this time, it was the killer's life that was on the line.
In May 1987, Michael Ross stands trial for the murders of Wendy, Robin, and the 2 14-year-olds, Leslie and April.
Ross tried a different ploy for avoiding the death penalty. His defense asked for a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, but the tactic ultimately failed. On the 5th of June 1987, it took the jury just 86 minutes to convict Michael Ross on all counts.
Ross, of course, is serving the 120 years he's already been given. He's now confronting the death penalty.
Connecticut law stated that if a defendant was found guilty of a capital felony, the jury must then decide whether to impose the death penalty. But there was a catch.
If an individual had a psychiatric disorder, that was by statute in Connecticut supposed to mitigate against him getting the death penalty.
The defense team had to rely on the testimonies of behavioral scientists to determine if Michael Ross had a mental disorder. One of those experts was Dr. Fred Berlin, who'd met and analysed Ross on several occasions.
I had an interview with him in the prison where he'd been incarcerated at that time. My first impression was that if I didn't know about the nature of the crimes that he's committed, there was nothing in seeing him or in interacting with him that would have suggested to me that he was a particularly dangerous individual.
Despite his meek appearance, Ross didn't hold back on the details of his brutal and sadistic crimes.
It was also very clear in looking at that we're likely talking about a serial killer who was acting in ways that included sexual involvements with his victims. And that individual has recurrent, intense cravings in which he is turned on sexually by the suffering, the degradation, the pain, even the death of another human being. I didn't have any doubt that he had the diagnosis of sexual sadism.
The prosecution argued that Ross was a calculating killer who raped and strangled his victims for sexual pleasure.
A lot of the times people have this misconception that strangulation is quick and easy. It's not. Strangulation takes a lot of rage, it takes a lot of force, it takes a lot of personal up-close contact with the victim. And so Ross really was the epitome of a psychopathic serial killer, and had he not been stopped, he would have kept on going. He admitted that himself.
For the families of the victims, seeing their loved one's killer in the flesh brought up a mixture of emotions. Leslie Shelley's father was one of those in attendance.
There was anger, there was sadness, there was all of that. I just remember Mr. Shelley painfully raging. As much pain as we were in, I don't think I've ever seen another man in as much pain. That stood out to me.
On the 6th of July 1987, the jury found Michael Ross to be deserving of the death penalty. But Ross's defense team appealed to the Supreme Court. And 7 years later, they ruled that a critical error made by the prosecution should overturn his sentence, reducing it to life in prison.
The prosecution was subsequently chastised because they'd held back the fact from the jury initially that even the government's evaluator agreed that he had this kind of mental disorder. And so that's one of the reasons they had to have a second sentencing. Yes, he was having these cravings in the same way a drug addict might have cravings, but could he have been able to control it?
The second sentencing took place in April 2000. After 5 weeks of testimonies and 9 days of deliberations, the jury finally reached their verdict.
The jury decided that they felt he could have controlled it, that he was criminally responsible.
What happens is that jury confirms the death penalty that's been given in Bridgeport County. Ross finds himself on death row.
Robin Staminsky's uncle Morgan Hills couldn't attend the trial, but was eagerly awaiting the result at home.
I don't think it was relief. I never recall anybody saying that when this guy dies or is executed or convicted, we can kind of start to get back to normal. There was no normal. Normal was being redefined every day from November 23rd on for everybody.
Whilst in prison, Ross revealed in several interviews with a psychologist that his murderous rampage had actually started a lot earlier than originally thought, back in May 1981, during his time at Cornell University.
A Vietnamese-born young woman called Dung Tu. She's 25. She's clever. She's absolutely marvelous, vivacious young woman.
Zun was last seen leaving the campus library, and her body was found in a stream next to a house that Ross was living in, but there wasn't enough evidence to indict him.
In October 2001, Ross pled guilty to the March 1982 murder of Paula Pereira and was sentenced to another 8 to 25 years in prison. Although he confessed to killing Dung Ngoc Tu during his time at Cornell University, he was never prosecuted for her death. Prison warden Anne Conoya worked as Ross's counselor during his time at the Department of Correction in Connecticut.
My first impression was that he was really arrogant. I don't ever think that Michael Ross felt that he was like the other people on death row. I think he always felt that he was above them. He talked to me a little bit about remorse and hurting families, and I never got that to be a genuine statement from him. I felt like he was trying to manipulate me.
Contrary to his previous appeals, Ross himself expressed his acceptance of the death penalty to the people evaluating him behind bars.
Mr. Ross said that he did not want the families of the victims to go through that and decided not to appeal the death penalty.
His attorneys wanted to say that he wasn't fit to make those decisions, and I don't agree.
On the 13th of May 2005, Michael Ross was executed by lethal injection at the age of 45. He was the last person in Connecticut to receive such a penalty after capital punishment was repealed in 2012.
Michael kept his glasses on and his eyes closed. He never turned to look at any of us. That was the end of it.
After Ross's execution, the Shelley family suffered further heartbreak. For Leslie's father, the loss of his beloved daughter was too great to bear.
It changed my husband. He never really got over it. It was like he was isolating him and myself from his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. And then in 2010, he committed suicide. He never got over Leslie, and he always blames himself. He changed so much.
Over the course of 2 years, Ross had murdered at least 7 innocent women and girls. Even when he was behind bars, he claimed that his deviant urges couldn't be contained.
He went on medication because he was afraid that even in prison, he would attack some of the female guards that were in there because of the cravings he was experiencing.
He said that he would likely do the same to me if he had the opportunity. The fact that he thought about it, yeah, it was a little unsettling for me.
The execution of Michael Ross had left families with mixed emotions.
There was even victims' families that didn't advocate for the death penalty. But for those who did, that I think it did probably bring some sort of closure to their nightmare that they have to live.
As far as trying to understand Michael, to this day, I don't hate him, but I don't like him neither for taking my daughter away. It's hard.
Robin's loss left a gaping hole in a lot of people, just as you would imagine. You know, she had quite a large family that cared about her, and the loss was felt for many generations. I think he's your classic sexual predator and psychopath, and their bodies telling him they have to kill. He has to kill, and Robin walked into his crosshairs.
Ross was a savage and dangerous predator who would stop at nothing to fulfill his twisted carnal urges. He attacked numerous innocent young women and girls, over half of whom would never see the light of day again. The 45-year-old's 2005 execution put an end to a life of sexual deviancy and undoubtedly makes Michael Ross one of the world's most evil killers.
The sound of rain on cracked pavement, a lonely road outside Eugene, Oregon. November, 1995. A woman's car sits idling by the tree-line headlights, cutting through the fog like two white eyes. Inside, the driver's seat is empty. The door is open. The engine is still running, and the radio hums a soft, static lullaby that no one is left to hear. Her name was Laura Haynes, 34 years old, mother of 2, a nurse at Sacred Heart Medical Center. She left her shift at 10:42 p.m., told her coworkers she was heading straight home. She never arrived. By morning, her husband called the police. By noon, search teams combed the road between the hospital and their house. By sunset, they found her car half sunk in mud doors, unlocked purse still inside, and a single shoe in the grass. No struggle marks, no blood, just absence. The air that day felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. Deputies taped off the scene, but there was nothing to tape. No witnesses, no footprints, no tire tracks except her own. It was as if Laura had stepped into the mist and been erased. The small town of Lowell, Oregon population, barely more than 1,000, was shaken awake. Laura wasn't the kind of woman who vanished. She was steady kind, always punctual, known by every face in the hospital cafeteria. Her disappearance tore through the quiet routines of that town like a thunderclap. Local papers ran the headline, "Nurse Vanishes, on Way Home Mystery Grips Community." Detectives started with the obvious. Her husband, Tom Haynes, stoic, soft-spoken, a mechanic. He wept through every interview. He had no alibi for part of the night, but no sign of guilt either, just the flat stare of a man hollowed out by something he couldn't comprehend. Friends said they were a good couple. No fights, no debts, no reason for her to run. Yet the silence of that forest was louder than any denial. Days turned to weeks. Police dogs traced her scent into the trees, but lost it near a creek. The current was fast swollen from autumn rain. For months, divers searched its length. Nothing. No body. No clue. The sheriff's department began to call it, what they hated most, a cold case in the making. Then came the phone calls. Not to police, to her family. Static on the line, then silence. Once a faint voice, low, distant, "I'm sorry." The number was untraceable. The calls stopped as suddenly as they began. It was the kind of cruel mystery that eats through sleep, that leaves a family staring at the phone night after night, hoping the next ring will explain everything. Christmas came without Laura. Her children hung stockings they never touched. Her husband sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker through snow, waiting for a shadow that never came. By January, the posters had curled from dampness. By spring, the search parties had stopped. The forest reclaimed the path where her car had been found. Grass covered the tire marks. Birds nested in the silence. And the file was thick with nothing. Witness statements that contradicted tips that led nowhere. Letters from psychics claiming visions of a woman near water. Investigators followed them all, desperate for a thread. None held. Then, one strange detail buried deep in a report refused to fade. A gas station attendant 2 miles from where the car was found remembered seeing a dark pickup truck idling by the pumps around the same time Laura left work. The driver, a man in his 40s, wore a baseball cap, pulled low, his face shadowed. When asked if he saw Laura, he hesitated. "Maybe," he said. There was a nurse. She bought coffee, looked tired. But when shown her photo, he couldn't be sure. Could have been her. Could have been anyone. The security tape from that night had already been recorded over. Another lead lost. Months bled into years. Life moved on except for the Haynes family. For them, time became a loop every day, a copy of the one before filled with the same questions, the same silence. Laura's mother died in 2003 without an answer. Her children grew up haunted by the shape of a story that never ended. And then 2 decades later, in 2015, the sheriff's office launched a cold case task force, a small team armed with new forensic tech determined to breathe life into Oregon's forgotten files. Laura's case was number 17. Detective Maria Torres opened the old folders and was struck by how little there was. Photocopies faded to gray handwritten notes from the 90s, the kind of fragile paper that felt like it could disintegrate under touch. But one thing caught her attention, a small evidence bag labeled "Unknown Fiber Passenger Seat" inside a single thread. Beige, almost invisible, never analyzed with modern methods. She sent it to the state lab. Weeks later, The report came back. It was carpet fiber not from the car, but from a model of pickup truck manufactured in 1994, the same year before Laura vanished, the same type seen by the gas station attendant. It was a whisper of a lead, but it was enough. Torres dove deeper. She cross-referenced every registered owner of that truck model in the county at the time. Dozens of names. One stood out: Dale Ketterman, a construction worker who lived 15 miles away. His record was clean, but his past was not. In 1995, he'd been questioned in another missing person case, never charged, but described by neighbors as odd, unpredictable. He'd moved out of Oregon in 1997, disappeared into the vastness of the Midwest. Torres ordered a background trace. Ketterman had died in 2012, heart failure, unclaimed body, cremated by the state. The trail seemed to end there, but something about him wouldn't let go. She found one last surviving item in his estate inventory, an old duffel bag logged by police after his death, filled with personal effects. Among them, a Polaroid photograph. The image was warped, time-stained, the edges burned. It showed a clearing in the woods. In the center, a car. The make and model matched Laura's 1991 Honda Civic. It was the first solid link in 20 years. Torres reopened the official file. She visited Laura's daughter Rachel, now in her 30s, a teacher. Rachel had kept her mother's letters, her jewelry, the birthday cards she never got to open. When Torres showed her the photograph, Rachel froze. "That's her car," she whispered. "That's Mom's." But there was more. Behind the car, barely visible through the haze, stood a figure, a man. The resolution was too poor to make out his face, but his silhouette matched Ketterman's build. The discovery reignited the case. Local news ran the headline, "1995 Oregon cold case reopened, new evidence found." The town stirred with old memories. People called in tips they'd kept, buried confessions whispered through fear. One woman said she'd seen a pickup parked near the forest that week, but she'd been too afraid to speak. Another remembered hearing screams late that night, distant, muffled, swallowed by the rain. Investigators began digging literally. The clearing in the photo was found after comparing tree patterns and ridge lines with aerial maps. The area had since grown over, but ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies beneath the soil. A search team marked the site. The excavation began at dawn. The shovel hit something solid, a fragment of metal, then cloth, then bone. Wrapped in layers of decayed plastic, they uncovered the remains of an adult woman still wearing the faded remnants of a nurse's uniform. The forensic ID took weeks, but the DNA matched. It was Laura Haynes. 20 years after she vanished, she was finally found. But what they discovered next would leave even hardened detectives silent. Beneath her body lay another small bundle fabric wrapped in duct tape about the size of a football. When the coroner opened it, he found strands of hair children's barrettes and a charm bracelet engraved with the name Amy. None of it belonged to Laura. A second victim, unidentified. Hidden beneath her, as if to keep her company or to bury two secrets at once. The cold case had cracked open, but it was only the beginning. Because the discovery didn't close the story, it widened it. Suddenly, Laura's disappearance wasn't just one family's nightmare, it was a key to something darker, something that had been buried under Oregon's rain-soaked soil for decades. Detective Torres stared at the evidence laid out before her. The Polaroid, the bracelet, the map of that lonely forest road, and felt the air shift. This was no longer just about justice for Laura. It was about finding out how many others had vanished in silence, how many stories had been erased beneath the trees. In the echo of that discovery, one truth lingered. The past never stays buried. And in Oregon's mist, the ghosts of 1995 were finally starting to speak. The clearing was silent, except for the soft hum of the generator lighting the excavation site. Rain fell in thin needles, streaking across the crime scene tape that fluttered like a torn flag. Detectives stood in a half circle, their boots sinking into the mud, eyes fixed on the gurney, carrying what was left of Laura Haynes. After 2 decades, the forest had finally given her back. But the ground had not been honest. It had returned more than one secret. The second bundle was placed beside her, small enough to cradle in 2 hands. The forensic team moved carefully, their gloves slick with rainwater. When the duct tape came off, a wave of damp, metallic air rose from the plastic. Inside were strands of blonde hair, bone fragments, a bracelet, and a single tooth. The bracelet shimmered under the floodlight. The engraving read, Amy. No missing person named Amy had ever been connected to Laura's case. No one in her circle, no one from her hospital, no child gone missing that week. Whoever she was, she had been buried beneath another woman's body, hidden under the story the world already thought it knew. Detective Maria Torres stood motionless, the rain dripping from her hairline. He used her grave, she whispered. He buried one inside another. It was a detail so cruel it almost felt symbolic, like the killer had been mocking the searchers all these years, hiding one truth inside another, knowing they'd stop looking once they found the first. Back at the sheriff's office, the evidence room came alive. Bags labeled Forest Site 1995 stacked across the counter. The Polaroid photo was sealed for preservation. Soil samples, bone fragments, fabric pieces, all logged and cataloged. Forensic pathologists began working through the night. Torres ordered a full DNA profile of both victims. Laura's confirmed quickly through her daughter's sample. The second took longer. The remains were too degraded. No fingerprints, no dental records, only fragments of mitochondrial DNA. They ran it through CODIS, the national database. Days passed. The lab's fluorescent lights burned late into the night machines, humming a mechanical lullaby for the dead. Then an alert. A partial match. A missing child from 1994. Amy Walters, age 9, reported missing from Springfield, barely 30 miles from where Laura vanished. Her file had been thin. A school photograph, a pink backpack found near a park, a mother's desperate handwriting on every note to police. Amy had walked home from a friend's house one afternoon and never made it. Her case had gone cold within a year, folded away into the archives of forgotten children. Now, 2 decades later, she had been found beneath another woman's grave. The shock rippled through the community. 2 missing women, 2 different years, buried together. The pattern was undeniable. Someone had hunted in that region during the mid-90s. Someone organized precise, deliberate. Torres spread both case files across her desk. Different victims, similar proximity, same corridor of wilderness. She started mapping disappearances from 1990 to 2000 along Highway 58, the stretch connecting Eugene to the Cascade foothills. By midnight, there were 7 red pins on the board, all unsolved, all female. The pattern looked like a spine down the map, each mark pulsing with years of silence. Torres didn't sleep. She returned to Dale Ketterman. His name echoed like static. A construction worker who'd traveled between job sites across that corridor during the same years. He'd died 3 years before Laura's body was found, but his ghost lingered in the paperwork, pay stubs, motel receipts, fragments of a life that drifted from county to county. A records clerk dug up an old police report from 1996. Ketterman had been questioned about a hitchhiker found injured near Oak Ridge. The woman had claimed a man in a pickup offered her a ride, then turned off into the woods. She escaped when he stopped to check his tires. She never saw his face clearly, only his hands scarred, grease-stained, trembling. The case was dropped when she disappeared again months later, assumed transient. Her name wasn't even recorded. Now that file became gold. Torres contacted Ketterman's last employer, a lumber company outside Medford. The HR manager remembered him vaguely. Quiet guy, he said. Didn't talk much. Always drove the same old pickup. Lived alone in a trailer by the river. You'd never notice him if you weren't looking. That was the problem. No one had been looking. A search warrant was issued for the contents of Ketterman's storage unit, unpaid for years, sealed by the state. Inside, dust and time, shelves of old tools, rusted nails, boxes of magazines, and in the back corner, a small trunk with a broken latch. Inside were dozens of Polaroids, each labeled with a location: Creek Bend, Quarry Road, Lakeview Trail. Most were landscapes. Trees, rivers, empty clearings, but some showed hints of something else. A shoe half buried in dirt, a torn sleeve, what looked like hair tangled in leaves. No faces, no bodies. Just aftermath, like trophies of silence. Forensics scanned the photos. The dates on the film stock matched 1993 to 1997, the same window as the disappearances. the locations matched 3 other cold cases still unsolved. The press got wind before the department was ready. Headlines screamed, "Oregon cold case killer, 2 decades, 7 victims, 1 pattern." The town erupted in fear and disbelief. Families of the missing flooded the sheriff's line. Each wanted to know if their loved one had been found, if this man, the quiet worker they'd once passed in a grocery aisle, had been the reason their world collapsed. Torres didn't answer. Not yet. She needed proof, and she found it buried in a detail no one had noticed before. The bracelet found with Amy's remains had a clasp unlike standard jewelry. It was a replacement part improvised from wire and a screw. The lab traced the screw type to an industrial supplier used exclusively by Ketterman's construction company. Only employees had access. It was the first physical link connecting him to the victims. Now the challenge wasn't finding evidence, it was reconstructing the truth from ashes. The man was dead, cremated. There would be no confession, no cross-examination, no trial. Only fragments, only stories retold by the earth. Torres met with Laura's daughter again. Rachel listened in silence as the detective explained the connections, the truck fiber, the Polaroid, the bracelet, the buried child. When Torres finished, Rachel said only one thing. He built something out there, didn't he? The question lingered. Built what? The next morning, search units combed Ketterman's last known property, a remote riverside lot hidden by cedar trees. The trailer was long gone, but the foundation remained a slab of cracked concrete. Behind it, a patch of disturbed soil. Dogs reacted instantly. They dug until sunset. Beneath the slab wrapped in layers of burlap, they found more. A collection of driver's licenses, jewelry, scrap fabric, bones. Each item belonged to a woman reported missing between 1993 and 1997. It was no longer theory, it was a timeline of horror. Yet what stunned the team most wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't. Among the bones were none that matched Laura or Amy. He hadn't buried them there. That site was older, pre-1995, which meant Ketterman had moved, changed, dumping grounds evolved. The forest near Lowell had been his final graveyard. By the time the coroner finished cataloging the remains, 5 more victims had names. One still didn't. The newspapers called her Jane 7. Reporters swarmed the sheriff's office, but Torres refused interviews. She stood before the evidence board watching the red pins bloom like wounds. 7 victims, 1 suspect, no trial, no justice, only revelation. Still, she kept searching. Because one question clawed at her: if Ketterman was dead, who took that Polaroid? It couldn't have been him. The image of Laura's car had been found in his belongings, yes, but the photo itself appeared newer. The type of film used wasn't produced until 1998, 3 years after Laura vanished, 1 year after he'd left Oregon. Someone else had been there. Someone who knew. Torres re-examined the evidence log from Ketterman's death. Among the listed items, a single contact address, a name scrawled on a form, Ray Ketterman, brother. Ray lived in Montana, no criminal record, a retired trucker. When she called, his voice was slow, tired. "Yeah," he said. "Dale was my brother. Haven't talked to him since '96. Why?" Torres hesitated. "Because we found something. We think he may have been involved in multiple disappearances." Silence, then a long exhale. "I figured you'd say that." Ray agreed to meet in person. When Torres arrived at his small farmhouse outside Missoula, he was waiting on the porch, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. Inside boxes of old photos lined the living room. He opened one and handed her a stack. Dale as a child. Dale with their father. Dale beside a rusted pickup, the same model traced to the scene. "I tried to warn people," Ray said quietly. "He wasn't right after the army. Used to disappear for days. Said he was hunting, but he'd come back different." Torres asked about the Polaroids. Ray looked away. "I took some," he admitted, "but not those. When he died, they sent me his stuff. I didn't know what was in the trunk. I mailed it back to the state." But his eyes said otherwise. Torres left the house uneasy. She felt it in her gut, the way he'd watched her, the way he'd lingered on Laura's name. Maybe he hadn't killed anyone, but maybe he'd known. Maybe he'd helped. Back in Oregon, the news spread faster than rain on asphalt. 2 brothers, 1 dead, 1 alive. One question echoing through every headline. Did he act alone? The forest had begun to give up its secrets, but each one led to another. And somewhere under layers of fog and memory, another truth was waiting. Because the case wasn't closed, not yet. The nightmare that began in 1995 was far from over. Fog drifted low over the Willamette Valley that morning, thick as breath, the kind of fog that swallows headlights and blurs faces. Detective Maria Torres stood by her car coffee cooling in her hand, staring at the map taped to her windshield. Red pins bled across Oregon like drops of blood on parchment. 7 confirmed victims, 1 suspect dead, 1 brother still breathing. Ray Ketterman, the quiet man in Montana, the last thread left to pull. By now, the FBI had joined the case. Their behavioral analysis unit flew in from Quantico, bringing files profiles and a language for monsters. They called it what it was, a serial pattern. Same age range, same disappearance zone, same burial habits. Victims abducted at night from isolated roads near water or forested clearings. The killer took tokens, small items, something to remember them by. Only this killer hadn't stopped when he died. Torres presented the Polaroid discrepancy to the task force. The photo stock didn't exist in 1995. Someone else had handled that evidence, someone alive after Dale Ketterman's death. Either he had an accomplice, Torres said, or someone continued what he started. The room fell silent. One agent leaned forward. "You're saying there's a copycat?" Torres shook her head. "No, I'm saying the sickness might have run in the family." The FBI's first step was to dig into Ray Ketterman's past. On paper, he was nothing a long-haul truck driver divorced 1 DUI, no arrests, no violence. But his roots told another story. He'd crisscrossed the Northwest for decades, from Oregon to Idaho to Montana, passing within miles of multiple cold case sites. Torres studied his logbooks, tracing his stops. Each one lined up too neatly with unsolved disappearances of women along highways. Coincidence or choreography? The more she looked, the less it felt random. A subpoena for his financial records revealed something odd. Cash withdrawals in small towns exactly matching the dates of certain abductions. The kind of small details that slip through the cracks of time unnoticed until someone connects them 20 years later. When agents questioned him again, Ray didn't flinch. "You people are seeing ghosts," he said. "My brother was sick, sure, but I wasn't him." Still, Torres noticed how his hands trembled when they showed him the bracelet engraved Amy. He said he didn't recognize it, but his pulse spiked on the monitor, micro-tells, instincts honed by years of interrogation. 2 weeks later, a new clue surfaced. A hunter hiking near Cottage Grove Lake, another of the red pin zones, found a rusted metal box half buried under leaves. Inside, a broken camera, several rolls of undeveloped film, and a cassette tape labeled 1997, Highway 58. The FBI lab developed the film. The photos were dark, grainy shot at night, tree lines, a flashlight beam, a woman's silhouette standing near a car, terrified hands raised. The next frame was empty. Then a glove, then nothing. The last image showed a man reflected in a car window. The face was partially obscured, but the profile was unmistakable. Not Dale. Ray. Torres stared at the photo until her eyes burned. The cold case had twisted again, rewriting its own history. The older brother hadn't just known, he'd been there. She replayed the cassette next. The tape hissed before the sound emerged, a woman's voice, faint, trembling. "Please don't hurt me," she said. Then a man's response, low-measured, eerily calm. "It's already done." A thud followed, then the shuffle of leaves, the sound of breathing, and the steady hum of rain. It was all the confirmation they needed. The arrest came quietly. A small-town diner in Kalispell, Montana. Ray sat alone at a corner booth eating eggs, the morning paper folded beside him. When the agents moved in, he didn't fight, didn't even look surprised. "Took you long enough," he muttered as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. At the sheriff's office, he asked for Torres. She flew in that night. They sat across from each other in the gray interview room, rain streaking down the window behind her. He looked smaller than before. Thinner eyes, dull and colorless. "You've been carrying this a long time," she said. He smiled faintly. "You ever try burying something in wet ground, detective? It always comes back up." He talked for hours. Not everything, not clearly, but enough to draw the outline of a nightmare. Dale had started it, he said. The first was an accident, at least that's what Dale told him. A hitchhiker who panicked, a shove a fall. But the feeling, the control, it did something to him. He couldn't stop. Dale told Ray everything, showed him photos, took him to the burial sites. He said we were cleaning up the lost ones. Ray whispered. The world forgot them, so we gave them a place to rest. After Dale's death, Ray kept the Polaroids. He said he wanted to make sure no one forgot the truth, but the photos didn't stop in 1995. Some were dated later 1998, 2000. Torres leaned forward. Those later ones, did you take them? He didn't answer, just stared through her into something far beyond the walls. The FBI searched his property. Behind the barn, near a row of weathered pine trees, the ground was uneven. Dogs hit within minutes. Another shallow grave. Inside, remains of a young woman, mid-20s. Beside her, a necklace engraved with a date, May 1999. The press exploded. Oregon cold case expands across states, killer brothers linked to 9 victims. Communities from Idaho to Montana reopened their missing persons files. Families came forward with photographs desperate for closure. Each revelation stretched the timeline further back, perhaps as early as 1989. The brothers had lived in the shadows for nearly a decade, preying on women who trusted the wrong car, the wrong smile, the wrong road. But the question that haunted Torres most wasn't how many they killed, it was how they chose. A pattern emerged. Nurses, waitresses, women traveling alone. Every single one of them had been kind, helpful, the kind of people who'd stop to help a stranger on the side of the road. Kindness had been their weakness. And beneath every killing lay a ritual. Dale had believed the forest could keep secrets. Ray believed the forest could forgive. When Torres confronted him again, she asked, "Why bury Amy under Laura?" He blinked slowly, almost dreamlike. "Because she was scared of the dark," he said. "He told me it would make her feel safe." The words chilled the room. Even the agents behind the glass went still. Months passed. Excavations expanded across 3 states. In the quiet of evidence labs, investigators pieced together a mosaic of horror fabric. Samples matched fibers, serial-numbered screws, every detail aligning like coordinates on a map of grief. Torres visited each site. She stood where the earth had been disturbed, where the moss had grown over the bones. She listened to the forest breathe. In every rustle of branches, she heard the echo of all those who never made it home. But one site troubled her most, the first burial ground discovered where Laura had been found. When forensics finished cataloging the soil layers, they discovered something beneath both women's remains, a wooden cross, hand-carved, weathered, burned along the edges. On the back, carved crudely with a pocket knife, were 2 words, "Forgive us." It was proof that both brothers had been there. That Ray had returned after Dale's death, not to destroy evidence, but to mourn, or to relive it. The line between guilt and grief had long been erased. By winter, the investigation had reached its end. 9 confirmed victims, dozens of potential others. Ray Ketterman, age 71, stood trial for 6 counts of murder across state lines. The courtroom was packed. Families of the lost journalists, strangers who'd followed the story since the first headline. Torres sat in the back, silent. The prosecutor displayed the photos, the forest, the Polaroids, the bracelet that said Amy. Each image hung in the air like ghosts. When Ray took the stand, he didn't plead insanity. He didn't deny anything. He just said, "We thought we were helping them find peace." The jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole. But peace was a fragile word. For Laura's family, there was no triumph, only release. Her daughter Rachel attended every hearing. When the verdict was read, she didn't cry. She just whispered, "It's over." Yet Torres knew it wasn't. Because the forest still held secrets. Because for every grave they found, there might be another that time hadn't yet uncovered. In the years that followed, Highway 58 became infamous, a corridor of ghosts. Travelers still drive through it, headlights cutting through fog, unaware of what lies beneath the soil. Locals say when the wind blows after rain, you can hear whispers near the tree line, soft, almost tender. Like someone asking to be remembered. And in her office, Torres kept the original Polaroid in a sealed envelope. The photo of Laura's car in the woods. A reminder that some stories don't end. They fade into the mist, waiting for the next detective, the next generation, to listen. Because justice doesn't bring back the lost, it only stops the silence. And in Oregon, after 20 years, that silence had finally been broken. The verdict echoed through the courtroom like the final crack of thunder after a long storm. Guilty on all counts. 6 murders confirmed, 3 still under investigation. Life without parole. The words meant closure on paper, but in the air, they felt hollow, like a door slamming shut on a room still full of ghosts. Outside, camera flashes lit the gray Oregon sky. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust toward tear-streaked faces. How does it feel to finally have justice? Do you forgive him? The victims' families didn't answer. Some wept. Some stared blankly at the courthouse steps. After 20 years of not knowing, the truth had come too late to comfort anyone. Detective Maria Torres stood at the edge of the crowd coat collar, turned up against the rain. She watched as Rachel Haynes, Laura's daughter, walked down the courthouse steps. No tears. No visible relief. Just a slow, deliberate calm, the kind of quiet that comes when grief has nowhere else to go. Rachel stopped beside her. They say justice was served, she murmured, but it still feels like he won. He got to live. She didn't. Torres nodded, her jaw tight. Sometimes justice isn't enough, she said. Sometimes the only thing we get is the truth. Rachel looked up at the sky. Then I wish the truth had come sooner. The rain fell harder. The courthouse clock struck noon. Somewhere deep in the distance, a freight train moaned through the valley like a voice carried by the wind. In the weeks that followed, Oregon lived under a new kind of silence, not the silence of mystery, but the silence of aftermath. Every small-town diner, every gas station along Highway 58 seemed to whisper the same phrase, the Ketterman brothers. Documentary crews arrived. Podcast hosts, crime show producers. They called it the Highway Ghosts Case. Newspapers ran retrospectives tracing how the investigation had stretched across decades, connecting 2 brothers, 9 victims, and a state haunted by its own landscape. But behind the headlines, real people were still trying to breathe. Rachel Haynes couldn't sleep. Every night, she dreamed of headlights cutting through fog, her mother's voice calling her name, always fading before she could answer. She began visiting the site where Laura had been found, a small clearing now fenced off and marked by a simple wooden cross. Locals left flowers there, and sometimes notes. Rachel left silence. Torres visited too. She stood by the tree line, listening to the wind drag across the leaves. It always sounded like whispering. The sheriff's department had archived the case, but Torres couldn't let it rest. Something still gnawed at her. The photo timeline, the discrepancies, the feeling that Ray's confession had been incomplete. He had given details no one else could have known, yes, but there had been pauses in his story gaps that felt rehearsed, as if he'd left something out. Then, 3 months after the sentencing, she received a call. Deer Lodge State Penitentiary. Ray Ketterman had requested a meeting. He says it's about another body, the warden told her. When Torres arrived, the air inside the prison felt thick with heat and disinfectant. They led her down a long corridor, past iron doors that clanged shut like punctuation marks. Ray sat in the visitor's booth, thinner than before, his face pale, lips cracked, a long shadow under each eye. "You said you had something to tell me," she began. He smiled faintly. "It's strange," he said, voice hoarse. "Once you start digging, you never stop." She waited. "There's one more," he said. "A place we never told anyone about. Before Laura, before Amy, before all of them." Her pulse tightened. "Where?" He coughed into his hand, then looked up. "Mount Pisgah, 1992. She was the first." Torres leaned closer. "Who?" He hesitated, eyes glassy. Her name was... He stopped, his gaze unfocused. "Doesn't matter now. The ground remembers her." Before she could press further, the guards moved in. His body slumped forward, a seizure, then silence. Minutes later, he was gone. Just like that, the last living witness to Oregon's darkest mystery had taken his final secret with him. The autopsy confirmed heart failure. Natural causes, they said. But nothing about the case had ever felt natural. Torres sat in her car afterward, rain streaking the windshield, replaying every word he'd said. Mount Pisgah. 1992. By dawn, she was there. The mountain rose east of Eugene, wrapped in mist, its trails slick from spring rain. She hiked with 2 deputies and a forensic technician, climbing through cedar and fern until the path split at a clearing overlooking the valley. The soil here was soft, damp, undisturbed. She stood still, scanning the ground, and then she saw it. Something pale caught in the roots of a tree. Not bone, not cloth, plastic, a corner of a photograph. She crouched and pulled it free. A Polaroid, warped by time. The image showed a woman smiling on a wooden bridge. Written on the back, April 1992, see you soon, D. The handwriting was identical to the notes found in Dale Ketterman's belongings. They started digging. 3 feet down, the shovel struck something hollow, a sound like a whisper, breaking. Within the hour, they had uncovered skeletal remains bound by rope and buried beneath a layer of stones. A necklace with a bird pendant still hung around the neck. The forensic team later identified her as Linda Carpenter, 26, a hiker who vanished from the Mount Pisgah trailhead in April 1992. Her case had been labeled a missing persons presumed accident. She had been the first. And now the circle was complete. 9 victims officially confirmed, but one image kept returning to Torres, the Polaroid that started it all. The car in the woods, the blurred figure behind it. She had assumed it was Dale, but now staring at the timestamp, she noticed something she'd missed. The shadow's height, the build. It didn't fit either brother. Someone else had been there. She took the photo to the lab again, enhanced the reflection in the car's rearview mirror. A face appeared, not clearly, but enough. Someone younger, someone unknown. A third person. That night, Torres sat in her office long after everyone had gone. The rain tapped the windows in slow rhythm. The board behind her was crowded photos, maps, red thread connecting timelines across decades. She stared at the mirror image from the Polaroid magnified on her monitor. A face male, mid-20s, narrow chin, wearing a baseball cap. Not Dale, not Ray. A ghost within a ghost story. Her phone buzzed. It was Rachel. "Detective," she said softly. "I just got something in the mail." "What is it?" "A photo. No return address. It's my mom, standing by her car, but it's taken from far away, from the woods." Torres's blood ran cold. "Rachel listened to me carefully." She said, "Don't touch anything. I'm on my way." When she arrived, Rachel was waiting on the porch, shaking. The envelope lay on the table inside a plastic bag. No postage stamp, just her name written in black marker. Inside a single Polaroid, Laura Haynes. Same scene as before, her car by the tree line, the fog heavy. But now, Torres noticed something she hadn't before. In the corner, faintly visible, the same reflection. The same man. Someone still had the negatives. Someone still watching. The room felt suddenly colder. Torres looked out the window, into the streetlight glow. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Somewhere in the distance, an engine started, a low rumble fading into darkness. She turned back to Rachel. "Lock every door," she said. "Don't go anywhere alone." Back at the precinct, she reopened the files again. Cross-checked every old name, every neighbor, every worker who had contact with the Ketterman brothers. One name reappeared: Evan Holt, a teenager who'd worked with Dale at a construction site in 1995. He'd vanished from records in 2001. Torres pulled his old ID photo. Same narrow chin, same build. Maybe a protege, maybe an accomplice. Maybe the one who had taken the final photo. The next morning, she requested a warrant to trace him. But before it was processed, a call came through dispatch abandoned vehicle found near the Santiam River. Oregon plates, inside a camera. When Torres arrived, the car was empty. Door open, engine cold. The same scene. History repeating itself. On the passenger seat, a note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Some nightmares never end. You just stop waking up." The case that had haunted Oregon for 30 years had just opened again. And somewhere out there, beneath the rain and the fog, the forest was watching, waiting to tell another story. Because in places like this, evil doesn't die, it just changes hands. The Santiam River moved slow that morning, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting a sky the color of bruised steel. The air smelled of pine-wet rock and something colder fear that had come back to life. The abandoned car sat half-submerged by the embankment. Mud swallowing its tires' doors, open wide like a mouth mid-scream. Detective Maria Torres stood at the edge of the scene, boots sinking into the silt. The camera lay on the front seat, its casing cracked, but the film still inside. She slipped on gloves, removed the roll, carefully sealed it in evidence plastic. Get this to the lab. Now. Her voice cut through the hum of the rain. Inside the car, the steering wheel was smeared with mud. The glove compartment hung open. No wallet, no keys, but under the driver's seat, an envelope. Inside, 6 photographs, all Polaroids, all the same composition women standing alone near forest roads, looking back at the camera. Each dated with a year, 1996, 1998, 2000, 2002, 2006, the last 2024. Torres stared at that final date. Fresh ink. The photo was still glossy. A woman in her 40s standing by a red sedan, her eyes wide mid-blink as if startled. No name, no coordinates, just one word scrawled across the back, next. By evening, the lab had developed the film from the camera. More photos, dozens. Some old, some new. The style was the same victims framed from a distance as if stalked, documented, catalogued. Among them, one image froze everyone in the room. Rachel Haynes standing by her porch 2 nights earlier, the angle identical to the mysterious photo she'd received in the mail. Whoever this was, he had been watching her, up close. Torres felt the room tilt. The forest that had once buried secrets was now producing them faster than she could catch. She spread the photos across the evidence table, the years spanning 3 decades. 1995 to now. The same signature, the same framing, the same compulsion. This wasn't nostalgia. This was continuity. The Ketterman brothers hadn't just inspired a copycat. They had created one. The name Evan Holt returned to every conversation. The missing worker from Dale's construction crew, 19 when the first victims vanished. His personnel file showed a quiet, unremarkable young man who kept to himself and followed orders. There was a note scrawled by a foreman. Dale trusts him completely. Says the kid's got potential. After 1997, Holt disappeared. No forwarding address, no tax record, no digital footprint. It was as if he'd evaporated into the woods. But in 2001, a camera store in Eugene had logged multiple Polaroid film purchases under a fake name, Eric Haynes, Laura's surname. Someone was mocking the victims now, or worse, trying to wear their memory like camouflage. Torres stared at the name until it blurred. Her chest tightened. This wasn't random. It was ritual. She called Rachel immediately. "We're placing you under protective watch," she said. Rachel's voice trembled. "You think he's after me?" Torres paused. "I think you're the one he wants to finish the story with." The FBI formed a joint task force overnight. They reopened files from as far back as the mid-90s, cross-referencing camera purchases, motel check-ins, vehicle rentals, and wilderness permits. The name Evan Holt resurfaced again in a 2003 hunting license application under the alias E.H. Lowell, the same county where Laura's car had been found. He'd never left Oregon. He'd been living under their noses. And then a new lead, grainy surveillance footage from a gas station outside Corvallis. A man buying instant film, baseball cap, hooded jacket, height and build matched the photo reflection from the Polaroid. When the clerk was shown the image, he hesitated. "Yeah, that guy comes by sometimes. Never talks, just pays cash. Likes the cheap coffee." Torres' team canvassed the area. No address, no car registered. But behind the station along the tree line, they found a small campsite, makeshift shelter blankets, and a portable darkroom kit. On the ground, discarded Polaroid frames. Burned film, ash scattered like confetti. Someone had been living there, hunting there. She crouched and brushed dirt from one of the burnt photo scraps. The half-face of a woman stared back, mouth-open eyes, frozen in terror. Torres clenched her jaw. "He's reliving it," she said quietly. "Every one of their murders, over and over." Days passed without sleep. Every forest road became a question mark, every fog bank a trap. The media swarmed again. Headlines screamed cold case resurfaces, possible third killer still at large, and a highway ghost's return. Is Oregon safe? But the real storm brewed quietly, far from cameras. Rachel's protection detail reported movement one night. A shadow near her house at 2 a.m. caught on her doorbell camera. The figure lingered at the edge of the frame, just outside the light. His face wasn't visible, but his hand reached out, brushing the mailbox. When the deputies rushed outside, he was gone. The next morning, inside the mailbox, they found another Polaroid, Rachel asleep on her couch, taken from inside the window. The envelope was signed with 2 letters EH. Torres knew what that meant. Evan Holt wasn't just copying the Ketterman brothers. He was continuing their legacy, turning their crimes into an inheritance of terror. He saw himself as their heir, the forest as his altar. They began tracking supply chains, film stock vehicle rentals, cash withdrawals. One of the agents traced a purchase to a hardware store in Sweet Home, a small logging town nestled deep in the Cascades. A man matching Holt's description had bought rope duct tape and a hunting knife 3 days earlier, paid in cash. That night, a camper reported hearing screams near the Green Ridge Trail. When deputies arrived, they found tire marks and a set of footprints leading into the woods, but no victim. The search lasted until dawn. Helicopters circled overhead spotlights carving through fog, and then they found it. A cabin, remote, no power, windows covered. Torres entered first flashlight cutting across the dark. The air smelled of rot and chemicals. On the walls, photos pinned in rows, hundreds of them. Women, children, families, every victim connected to the Ketterman case and more. It was a museum of fear. On a table, a camera pointed toward the door, still recording. She pressed play. The static cleared. A man's voice filled the room. Calm, steady. "You found it," he said. "Good. That means the story's almost done." Torres froze. The man on the tape wasn't old. His voice was youthful, deliberate. "You think you solved it," he continued, "but you didn't understand it. They weren't monsters. They were teachers. And I learned everything." A long pause. "Now it's my turn." Outside agents swept the area. No sign of Holt, no car, just empty ground. Then came a call from dispatch, a hit on a traffic camera 20 miles north. A pickup truck, same model as the one from 1995, driving toward the coast. Torres felt her pulse spike. She jumped into her cruiser siren, wailing through the mountain air. For 2 hours, they chased through rain-slicked highways, the headlights slicing through mist. Every bend of the road felt like déjà vu, the same route Laura had vanished on 30 years ago. Then, just before sunrise, they found the truck abandoned near a cliff. Door open, headlights on. At the edge, footprints, only one set. Torres approached slowly, the sea below thrashing against black rock. Something gleamed in the dirt, a Polaroid camera placed neatly on the ground. She picked it up. The last photo slid out, still developing. She held her breath as the image formed, a woman's silhouette standing by the cliff's edge, facing the ocean. Then another figure emerging behind her, herself. The photo shook in her hands. She turned, scanning the ridge flashlight, slicing through the fog. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind, the echo of waves crashing far below. But somewhere beyond the mist, she felt it, the weight of eyes watching. The forest had claimed another secret. The man was gone. The nightmare continued. By noon, the scene was sealed off. Evidence teams scoured every inch. The prints matched Holt's partials, but there was no body, no sign of a fall. Just one message etched into the truck's dashboard with a knife. The next story starts when the last one ends. Torres drove back in silence, the Polaroid still in her pocket. She knew what it meant. Holt wasn't dead. He was waiting for her for the next name, the next headline. He wanted her to carry the story forward, and she would, because as long as someone remembered, he couldn't disappear into the woods again. But deep down she knew the truth. Every cold case detective learns eventually some monsters don't die. They adapt, they evolve, they listen for their names in the rain. And tonight, as Oregon fell under another curtain of fog, she could almost hear it again. The whisper of a camera shutter somewhere far away. Dawn crawled across Oregon like a bruise spreading through the fog. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, and neither had Detective Maria Torres. Sleep was something other people did. She lived now between flashes of lightning and static radios, between nightmares that happened while she was awake. Every agency in the state was looking for Evan Holt. His face was everywhere, news broadcasts, digital billboards, gas station posters. But Holt wasn't the kind of man you caught by looking. He was the kind that waited until you blinked. The FBI called it a statewide manhunt. Torres called it déjà vu. Every clue they found felt like a reflection of the Ketterman brothers' same traps, same rituals, same taste for theatrics. Only Holt wasn't trying to hide. He was performing. Every move was staged for her. The first message came 2 days after the cliff chase. A package dropped at the front desk of the sheriff's office, no return label soaked through with rain, inside a single Polaroid. Torres's apartment door photographed from the hallway. Beneath it, a note written in red marker. "You're getting warmer." She stared at it for a long time, heartbeat echoing in her throat. The hallway in the photo was empty, but the reflection in the peephole caught something, a faint blur, a shoulder, a shape that could have been anyone. Or him. For the first time, she felt the weight shift. She wasn't chasing Holt anymore. He was chasing her. At night, she stopped turning on her lights. She ate cold food, kept her curtains drawn, slept in fragments. Every sound felt like a footstep. Every shadow looked like a man with a camera. The task force set up surveillance. 2 agents parked across the street, but Holt was a ghost. He moved between the blind spots of technology, the cracks between moments. Then came the calls. Static first, then silence. Once a whisper, "I see you looking." Torres slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. She knew the pattern. This was how it had started for Laura Haynes, for Amy Walters, for every woman who became a name on the evidence board. A slow tightening of the world until the only thing left was fear. But fear could also be bait. She spent the next day at headquarters combing through every unsolved case in the last 5 years that carried Holt's signature: missing women near wooded highways, abandoned cars, Polaroids left behind. A timeline began to form, each site connected by one constant proximity to old Ketterman burial grounds. Holt wasn't random, he was nostalgic. She pinned the photos to the wall, rows and rows of faces, victims and witnesses, ghosts and suspects. And right in the center, she placed his picture. "Every time you run, you come back here," she whispered. "To them." The rain beat against the window like fists. Her phone vibrated. "Unknown number." She answered. "Detective Torres," the voice said, calm, measured, almost polite. "You've been doing such good work." She froze. He laughed softly. "But you're missing one photo." The line went dead. Minutes later, an alert came from her surveillance unit, motion detected outside her building. She drove home at 80 miles an hour siren, slicing through the night. When she arrived, the agent's car was empty, doors open, radios still hissing. Then she saw it, a Polaroid pinned to her door with a knife. The flash had caught her apartment hallway, same as before, but now there were 2 figures, the missing agents lying on the floor. She ripped the photo down, heart pounding, burst through the door. The apartment was dark. The agents were inside, alive, gagged, disoriented. One pointed toward the kitchen. On the counter, another photo, taken seconds earlier. Torres standing at her own front door, mid-motion. He had been there. He had taken it as she arrived. By morning, the task force was in chaos. Every agent on the case went armed, sleep-deprived, desperate. The news called Holt Oregon's phantom killer. Social media turned him into a myth, the man who hunted hunters. Torres shut the noise out. She studied the Polaroid again this time, not for the obvious. In the reflection on the kitchen window, there was something: faint shapes of trees, mist, and a neon sign. The word Evergreen. Evergreen Motel, an old roadside place near Oak Ridge, long abandoned. She didn't wait for backup. She drove. The motel sat at the edge of the forest, its sign half collapsed, buzzing weakly. The parking lot was empty puddles, reflecting the red flash of her taillights. The office door hung open. Inside, dust and silence. A single light flickered from room 6. She drew her weapon. Each step down the hallway felt like walking through memory. The same layout as Laura's last night. The same smell of damp carpet and mold. Room 6's door creaked open. On the bed, rows of Polaroids spread out like tarot cards. Every victim. Every scene. And in the center, a new one. Torres, standing outside the motel, gun raised. Her blood ran cold. Someone was filming her right now. She turned nothing. Just the wind through broken blinds. Then she saw it. A small red light blinking from the corner ceiling vent. A camera. Live feed. She fired once, shattering it. The echo bounced down the hallway like thunder. From somewhere deeper in the building came a voice, male, calm, distant. "You don't have to chase ghosts, Maria. You're already one of them." She spun toward the sound. "Show yourself!" Footsteps retreated down the corridor. She followed, weapon steady. The hall twisted left, then right, ending in a staircase that led down to the basement. The air grew colder, heavier. Water dripped from the ceiling like a ticking clock. At the bottom, a door. On it, written in marker developing room. She pushed it open. Inside, red light. Dozens of photographs hanging from strings, dripping chemicals into shallow trays. Every photo was of her, at work, at home, sleeping. In the corner, a single Polaroid developing under the red glow. She stepped closer. The image formed slowly grain by grain until her breath caught. It wasn't her. It was Rachel Haynes, bound, eyes wide. On the back, 3 words, finish what they started. The sound behind her was soft but unmistakable. A floorboard creaking. She turned, gun raised, nothing. Then another sound, a shutter click. She fired. The flash illuminated a figure ducking into the shadows. The photo strings swayed violently. She ran after him through the narrow hallway, adrenaline burning through fatigue. He was fast, darting between rooms through the back exit into the trees. The forest swallowed him instantly. Torres stood at the threshold, breathing hard, the rain washing chemical streaks from her hands. The red light from the motel spilled across the mud, fading into darkness. Somewhere out there, Holt was still watching, still waiting for the final shot. And somewhere in that darkness, Rachel was alive or wasn't. Torres looked down at the Polaroid one last time. The image had fully developed now. Behind Rachel through the blur of motion was a motel room. This one, room 6. He had been there minutes ago. She whispered, he's turning the story on itself. The forest answered with silence. Then, faint, distant, unmistakable, the sound of another camera shutter. The forest was no longer a place on a map. It was a living thing, breathing, listening, holding its secrets close. Detective Maria Torres moved through the rain-dark pines' flashlight, trembling in her grip, every beam of light swallowed by mist. The trail behind the Evergreen Motel wound upward toward the old logging road where everything had begun Laura Haynes's last drive home. Dispatch whispered through static units en route 5 minutes out. She didn't answer. 5 minutes was too long. In her pocket, the final Polaroid burned against her palm. Rachel Haynes alive, eyes wide, somewhere in this forest. Holt had chosen this place for a reason. The same soil that had hidden the past was about to stage its encore. Each step cracked the silence. Branches leaned low, dripping water like tears. Somewhere ahead, a faint glimmer pulsed a lantern swinging. Torres killed her flashlight and listened. Rain whined her heartbeat, then footsteps. A voice calm close. You followed the trail just like I knew you would. She turned toward the sound. Where is she, Evan? Laughter soft and disembodied. You already know. You've seen the picture. Her eyes scanned the dark. The mist thickened, curling around trunks like smoke. Every sound seemed to come from everywhere. He was moving in circles. Torres took a breath, forcing her pulse to slow. You don't want her. You want the story. That's why you keep leaving your ghost behind to make sure someone's listening. The woods answered with silence. Then behind her, another whisper, You're listening now. She spun light cutting through fog, and there, for a fraction of a second, a face, pale smiling, then gone. She pressed forward. Each turn of the path looked the same, a repetition of tree rock shadow. But then, ahead, the lantern glow steadied, hung from a branch, swinging in wind. Beneath it, a wooden chair, empty. On the seat, a Polaroid camera, still warm, the last photo sliding out. Torres lifted it slowly. The image formed Rachel lying on the forest floor, bound but breathing. Behind her, a carved sign nailed to a tree, Evergreen. Torres turned. The motel's rear wall was only a few hundred feet away. She ran. The door to room 6 gaped open, rain sweeping across the threshold. The photos that had once lined the bed were gone, every one of them. A faint sound drifted from below metal scraping wood. Basement. She descended carefully. Weapon drawn, light low. The air was thick with chemicals and mold. In the center of the room stood a single tripod. On it, a camera pointed toward an empty chair. A voice echoed from the shadows. Say cheese, detective. She pivoted toward it. Holt stepped into the half-light. Same cap, same stillness, but his eyes too calm, almost disappointed. You weren't supposed to bring friends. They're not here yet, she said. He smiled. Good, then it's just us. The air between them stretched tight as wire. Where is Rachel? He tilted his head. She's fine. I made sure she could see this, the end of her mother's story. Torres steadied her aim. It ends tonight. He laughed quietly. It never ends. They thought the Kettermans were the story. but it was always about what comes after. You think you're the hero. You're just the next headline. He took a step closer. Look around. You're already in the frame. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the camera. Then, through the static of rain, faint sirens began to rise. Holt's smile faltered. Torres seized the moment. It's over, Evan. The forest isn't yours anymore. He looked past her toward the stairs like a man watching his reflection fade. You can't catch a ghost, he murmured, and ran. She chased him through the corridor, out the back door, into the night. The rain came harder now, a curtain of white noise. He vanished into the trees again, but this time she could hear him footfalls splashing through puddles, branches snapping. She followed the sound to the riverbank. There, through fog, she saw him standing by the water's edge, camera dangling from his hand. "This is where it ends," she shouted. He raised the camera slowly. "No, detective, this is where it begins." The flash went off, bright, blinding. When her vision cleared, he was gone. The only thing left was the camera, floating face down in the shallows. She waded in, pulled it free. Inside, one undeveloped photo. Back under the glow of her car's headlight, she waited for the image to appear. Rain dotted the surface. As it came into focus, Rachel Haynes safe sitting inside a patrol car. The timestamp, 10 minutes ago. He'd let her go. He hadn't been hunting her. He'd been hunting Torres. By sunrise, the forest was a crime scene. Again, lights, tape uniforms, drones circling like mechanical vultures. But Holt was gone. No footprints after the riverbank. No blood. Just one final message carved into a tree trunk above the waterline. Thanks for the story. Torres stood beneath it, soaked to the bone, holding the Polaroid that proved Rachel was alive. Relief mixed with something colder recognition. He hadn't escaped to vanish. He'd escaped to rewrite the ending. She looked upriver. The fog rolled west toward the towns, the highways, the lives untouched so far. Somewhere out there, he would be watching through another lens, framing his next scene. Weeks passed. The search expanded into Washington, then Idaho. Leads came and went, each one evaporating into rumor. Rachel entered protective custody, her statement recorded through tears and disbelief. "He told me," she said softly, "he just wanted someone to understand him. He said Detective Torres already did." Torres stopped sleeping altogether. The case file never left her desk. Every night, she replayed the chase in her head, the flash, the silence, the missing second where he slipped out of sight. Sometimes she dreamed of cameras clicking in the dark, of faces developing out of nothing. Sometimes she woke to find her apartment window open, curtains fluttering the air, smelling faintly of rain and chemicals. Nothing was ever stolen, but once a single Polaroid lay on her kitchen table. A photograph of the forest at dawn, no people, just mist. On the back, "See you soon." The Bureau wanted her off the case. They said obsession made her blind. They didn't understand that blindness was the point that Holt wanted her trapped between knowing and not knowing, between truth and myth. She stayed on anyway. She drove the highways every night, headlights slicing through fog, waiting for a shadow to step out. She began to record herself hour after hour so she could prove later that she hadn't imagined the sounds. She heard the shutters in the dark, the faint laughter on the wind. In time, the tapes filled a box. On the final one, dated late autumn, her voice was quieter, slower. "If you're listening to this," she said, "and you find the photos, you'll see he was never chasing us for pleasure. He was chasing us for permanence. He wanted the story to outlive him. Maybe that's what every ghost wants." A pause. "Maybe that's why I can't stop following." The tape ends with the sound of rain and a single click of a camera shutter. Months later, hikers near the Santiam Ridge discovered an old Polaroid camera lying in the moss. Inside one undeveloped photo. When the lab processed it, the image that appeared wasn't of Holt. It was of Maria Torres standing at the edge of the forest, looking straight into the lens. The timestamp the day after she vanished. Her cruiser was found a mile away. Engine still running, headlights cutting through fog like two white eyes. Just like Laura Haynes's. The file was reopened. The name added to the list. Case hash 47, Detective Maria Torres, status missing. And somewhere in a drawer full of Polaroids that no one dared throw away, her image continued to develop slowly, softly, like the forest itself, refusing to let the story fade. Morning light drifts through the blinds of an office that hasn't changed in 20 years. Dust on the filing cabinets, a map still pinned to the wall, its red markers fading to rust. On the desk, a folder stamped Closed Torres Maria. Detective Elena Vasquez has been on the job less than a month. She wasn't even born when the first victims disappeared, but the Torres file keeps whispering to her. Everyone told her it was a dead end. Let the ghosts rest. But the dead don't rest in Oregon. They wait. The first thing she notices is the smell old paper and rain trapped in walls. The second is the weight of the silence, as if the room itself remembers the voices that once filled it. She opens the folder. Inside photographs, notes in Torres's handwriting, the last Polaroid ever taken of her frozen mid-stare, framed by fog. Vasquez traces the outline of the face she's only known from legend, the detective who disappeared chasing a ghost. A memo clipped to the back reads, Evidence transferred archival storage Lane County, the date 2 days after Torres vanished. That means someone else handled her evidence, someone who outlived her story. She closes the file, grabs her keys, and drives east toward the storage compound where Oregon keeps its unsolved memories. The warehouse hums with fluorescent light. Rows of boxes stretch into the dark, labeled by year and county. Vasquez signs the ledger and walks alone between aisles of history. 1995, 1996, 1997. Each shelf a time capsule of broken families and unanswered questions. She finds it at the end of Roe E. Haynes, Ketterman, Torres. The handwriting on the label is faded, but careful Torres's own. Inside plastic sleeves of Polaroids, each one numbered each one a frozen heartbeat. Victims, forests, cars. And then, at the very bottom, an envelope without a tag. The seal is unbroken. She hesitates, then opens it. One photograph slides out. It shows a small clearing mist rising through cedar's morning light, cutting between trunks. In the center, a woman's figure half turned toward the camera. At first glance, Vasquez thinks it's Torres. The stance, the posture, the holstered weapon. But the timestamp in the corner is recent. September 19th, 2024. She studies the background, the same tree line seen in earlier crime scene photos, the same clearing where Laura Haynes' car was found. Someone went back. She drives there before she can talk herself out of it. The forest hasn't changed. The same road, the same stillness. Her tires crunch over gravel, echoing down a corridor of trees. When she parks, the sound of the engine fades into rain. The clearing waits for her, quiet, as a held breath. She moves carefully, scanning the ground. The earth is uneven, disturbed. Something glints near a root, a small metal badge half buried in mud. She kneels. Lane County Sheriff, Torres M. The rain falls harder, washing mud from the engraved letters. She radios headquarters, voice steady. I've found something. Send a unit. But the static that answers is thick, distorted. No words. Then from behind her, a faint click. Mechanical. Familiar. A camera shutter. She turns. Nothing. Only trees. Her heart beats faster. Who's there? Silence. She moves deeper into the woods, every step louder than it should be. The air feels charged electric. Then she sees it nailed to a trunk, a Polaroid still developing. The chemical smell is fresh. She pulls it down. The image forms herself, standing in the same clearing seconds earlier. Her breath clouds in the cold. Okay, she whispers, you're here. She follows the trail of Polaroids, each one, newer each one, showing her from slightly different angles, turning, walking, looking back. Whoever's taking them is close enough to hear her breathing. At the end of the trail, an old wooden box rests against a stump. She opens it. Inside, dozens of photos, all of the same woman, Torres. Some in uniform, some candid, all taken from a distance. The last one is different. Torres stands on the riverbank at dawn, looking straight into the camera. Behind her, a shadowed figure holds up another Polaroid, the caption scrawled in ink legacy. Vasquez stumbles back, the word echoing in her head. Legacy. It wasn't about killing. It was about continuation. Headquarters finally reaches her through the static. Detective Vasquez, your GPS stopped transmitting 10 minutes ago. Do you copy? She answers, voice low. I'm still here, and I think I know what he wanted. She sends them the photos, everyone. Within hours, the clearing becomes a flood of vehicles, sirens, tape reporters arriving like vultures. But Vasquez stays apart, watching from the tree line. A forensic tech calls out, Detective, we found something else, film stock. Same type as the Ketterman evidence. She nods slowly. He's still using the same lens. But inside, she knows the truth no report will write. The man behind the camera changes. The obsession doesn't. The forest breeds new storytellers. Weeks later, the department holds a memorial. 29 years since Laura Haynes disappeared, 9 since Torres. Names are read aloud in the courthouse lobby, candles flickering against the marble. Vasquez stands at the back, head bowed. When the ceremony ends, an older woman approaches Rachel Haynes, gray streaks in her hair, now eyes still carrying the weight of all those years. "You're the new detective," Rachel says. "Yes, ma'am." Rachel studies her face. "You remind me of her." Vasquez hesitates. "Detective Torres?" Rachel nods. She never gave up, even when the rest of them stopped caring. Vasquez starts to reply, but Rachel presses something into her hand, a small envelope. "This came to my house last week," she says. "No address. I think it's meant for you." Then she walks away. Inside the envelope, another Polaroid. The same clearing, the same mist. Only now, 2 figures stand there. Torres and Vasquez, shoulder to shoulder, both looking directly at the camera. The timestamp reads tomorrow. That night, Vasquez sits alone in her apartment, the photo under a lamp. She studies every detail, the light, the trees, the way the shadows fall. It looks too real to fake, too deliberate to dismiss. A thunderstorm rolls over the city, lightning flashes, turning her reflection in the window into a ghost. She whispers, "If you're still out there, I'm listening." The answer comes not in words, but in sound, the faint, unmistakable click of a camera shutter from somewhere outside her door. Morning. The city wakes to fog and sirens. In the evidence room, the Polaroid still lies under glass. The image has changed overnight. Torres is gone from the frame. Only Vasquez remains. And at the bottom edge, in wet ink, new handwriting has appeared. Some stories never end. They develop. The rain had returned to Oregon, steady and endless, the kind that blurred the world into moving watercolor. Detective Elena Vasquez watched it streak down her windshield as the radio murmured static. It had been months since the Polaroid marked "Tomorrow" appeared, months of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and the sound of phantom shutters in her dreams. Officially, the case was closed again. Unofficially, she couldn't let it go. Something was still moving beneath the surface, quiet, patient, waiting. That morning, the evidence lab called. A technician had been recataloging items from the Torres archive and found something strange, a roll of undeveloped film hidden inside the lining of a camera bag. The inventory label matched Evan Holt's property, collected after the Evergreen Motel raid 9 years ago. No one had noticed it before. Vasquez drove through the storm to the lab, heart tightening with each mile. The technician handed her the developed prints one by one, the photos dripping faintly with chemical residue. They weren't of victims this time, they were of Torres. Not surveillance shots, personal ones. Photos of her working crime scenes, standing by her car, talking to colleagues, even laughing once. The photographer had been close, too close, and the last photo wasn't Holt's work. It was dated 3 days after his disappearance. The image showed Torres sitting in a diner booth, eyes fixed on something outside the window. A coffee cup, half full. The timestamp was real. She hadn't vanished in the forest. She'd been alive for at least 3 more days. The revelation hit like a silent explosion. Vasquez reopened the map. She traced the timeline backward, Holt's last confirmed sighting near the Santiam River. Then nothing until that diner photo. A sticker on the wall in the photo background read, "Coffee Junction, Bend, Ore." She drove. The diner still stood at the edge of Route 97, neon flickering weakly in the fog. Inside, time hadn't moved cracked red booths, the smell of burnt toast, the soft hum of an old jukebox. The waitress, gray-haired and cautious, recognized the name instantly. Torres, sure. I remember her. Came in that morning after a storm, looked tired, said she was heading south. Was she alone, Vasquez asked? The woman hesitated. She wasn't when she left. She reached under the counter and pulled out an old Polaroid, corners yellowed. Found this, stuck under a napkin holder a few days later, kept it, didn't know why. Vasquez took it gently. The photo showed Torres at the diner counter. Behind her, half out of frame, a man in a dark cap holding a camera. Evan Holt, alive. The next 48 hours blurred into motion tracking records, interviewing motel clerks, reviewing toll cameras. Holt had been seen again, always on the periphery, a truck parked near rest stops, receipts with his handwriting, occasional sightings that no one believed. And one strange pattern, every location corresponded to places linked to Maria Torres's unsolved cases. It was as if he was following her ghost or she was following his. Vasquez realized then that maybe neither had stopped hunting. Maybe they were circling each other all along. The breakthrough came from a park ranger near Crater Lake. A report filed years earlier, dismissed as irrelevant, described an abandoned cabin deep in the restricted zone, lights seen flickering inside months after Torres's disappearance. The coordinates sat halfway between Holt's last known route and the southern border. Vasquez stared at them. A triangle on the map. 3 points. Holt, Torres, the forest. The same geometry of every disappearance before them. She drove there at dawn. The dirt road was nearly erased by rain, each bend more uncertain than the last. Trees closed in until the forest swallowed the sky. After an hour, the cabin appeared small, sagging, its windows boarded. The air around it felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. She stepped out, gun drawn, her voice low. "This is Detective Vasquez. If anyone's inside, come out slowly." No answer. She approached the door, pushed it open. Inside, dust and dampness and something else. On the table, a Polaroid camera, a half-filled journal, and dozens of photos pinned to the wall. Not crime scenes, not trophies. Self-portraits. Torres taken over months, hair longer, expression hollow, eyes staring into the lens as if trying to remember who she was. Vasquez whispered, "You didn't disappear, did you?" A gust of wind rattled the window. She turned a page of the journal. The handwriting matched Torres's. "He's gone, but I cannot leave. The forest knows my name now. I see him when it rains. I hear the shudder when I close my eyes. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's waiting. Maybe I am too." The final entry. "Someone will come when they do tell them I kept watching." Underneath the words taped to the page, a small photo. Vasquez herself, standing at the edge of the clearing from weeks ago. The ink below it read, "Welcome to the story." Her flashlight flickered. From somewhere behind her came a creak, slow, deliberate. She turned, weapon raised. Nothing. Then the flash of a camera, bright, blinding. When her vision cleared, the doorway was empty. She ran outside through the trees, scanning the rain. Only her footprints marked the mud. But on her windshield, under the wiper blade, someone had left another Polaroid. It showed the cabin door and her standing in it, gun drawn. She looked around, heart pounding. The forest was silent again. He or whoever had inherited his obsession was still out there. Maybe Holt, maybe Torres, maybe the story itself. Back at headquarters, she filed the photos, everyone labeled and sealed. The chief asked if she'd found anything conclusive. She said only, "We found where it ends." But that night alone in her apartment, Vasquez took one photo out of the evidence envelope. The one of Torres sitting in the diner. Under bright light, she noticed something she hadn't before, a reflection in the window beside Torres. Another figure facing her. Female. Same height, same build, same dark hair. Torres wasn't being watched. She was meeting someone. The resemblance was unmistakable. The reflection was of Vasquez herself. She sat frozen, staring at the impossible image. The timestamp hadn't changed. 3 days after Torres's disappearance, 20 years before Vasquez joined the force. The phone rang, jolting her. A voice on the line, female, calm, familiar. "Stop looking, detective. You'll never like what develops." Click. The line went dead. At dawn, Vasquez drove back to the forest. No backup, no call-in. Just her and the fog. She parked at the same clearing where it had all begun, the Haynes car site, the first Polaroid, the endless circle. The mist moved like breath between trees. She stepped forward, her boots sinking into soaked earth. For a moment she thought she heard movement, the faint rustle of leaves, the sigh of a shudder. Then she saw it. On the ground, a camera, the same model, still warm. She picked it up. The last photographs slid out, wet with rain colors forming slowly. In it, she stood in the clearing, back turned, looking into the fog. And just beyond her shoulder, a woman's figure, smiling. The same face from every photo before. Maria Torres, alive or something close to it. The caption scrawled at the bottom in trembling handwriting. "Some of us don't vanish. We just stay inside the frame." That was the last time anyone saw Detective Elena Vasquez. Her cruiser was found days later near the trailhead headlights, still on engine, humming quietly in the rain. Inside, a single envelope sat on the passenger seat. Inside it, one undeveloped photo. No caption. No date. Just the faint outline of a woman lifting a camera toward the lens. The shutter frozen mid-click. The tape opens with the sound of rain. Always the rain. The documentary crew calls their project Echoes in the Fog. 29 years since the first disappearance, 6 since Detective Elena Vasquez drove into the forest and never came back. A camera pans over the same clearing where everything began. Laura Haynes' car, the broken fence, the trees that seem to lean closer each year. A narrator's voice low and steady. It started as a murder investigation. It became a story about inheritance, how evil passes not through blood but through memory. Old footage plays black and white stills of deputies in yellow slickers, flashbulbs popping newspaper headlines, screaming cold case solved, and then months later, detective missing. The screen cuts to Rachel Haynes now in her 50s, sitting beneath a porch light. Her hands tremble around a mug. "I thought it was over," she says, softly. "I thought Mom could rest. But every few years somebody calls. They found a photo or a tape or a box in the woods. It's like the story keeps writing itself." The film cuts to the evidence room in Lane County. Rows of gray boxes, a single desk lamp burning like an altar candle. The new archivist, June Reynolds, flips through files stamped restricted. She explains that in 2029, the department began digitizing all analog material. "We thought it was routine," she says, "until we found a reel labeled Torres Training Video 1995. The footage shows Torres decades younger addressing a class of recruits. She speaks about the psychology of unresolved crime. "Cold cases don't freeze," she says on the tape. They breathe. They wait for someone to exhale first. The film pauses on her face. The narrator murmurs, 3 years later, she became one. Outside, thunder rolls. The documentary crew interviews locals at diners and gas stations, people who still remember the searchlights cutting through fog, the police convoys that came and went. A logger recalls finding Polaroids nailed to trees. A motel owner swears he once rented a room to a woman who looked exactly like Torres, though the signature in the ledger was E. Vasquez. "Could have been grief playing tricks," he says. "Or maybe they were the same person you know." The camera never lies, but it doesn't tell the truth either. The narrator's voice overlaps with the hiss of rain on microphone covers. In Oregon, the past isn't buried, it's developed. Halfway through the film, the tone shifts. We see a new investigator, Special Agent Malik Cooper, standing beside a table of digitized photos. He gestures to a screen. "We ran facial recognition analysis on the final Polaroids recovered from Vasquez's cruiser," he explains. 2 of them were composites, double exposures created intentionally, one face over another. The camera zooms in. Overlaid images form something almost human, but not quite Torres's eyes. Vasquez's jawline halts smirk. "Whoever took the photo wasn't documenting reality," Cooper says. "They were manufacturing it." The film returns to Rachel. "They keep asking what I think happened," she says. "I think they all became part of it. That forest, it doesn't kill people. It keeps them." She opens a small wooden box on her lap. Inside are faded Polaroids wrapped in plastic. She chooses one, carefully holding it up to the camera. It shows the clearing at dawn. In the distance, 2 figures, indistinct silhouettes against light. "This one came last year," she says. "No postmark, just rain on the envelope." The documentarian asks, "Who do you think took it?" Rachel looks away. "Maybe nobody took it. Maybe the camera just remembers." Cut to archival footage of the original press conference in 1995. The sheriff declaring closure for the Haynes family, the optimism, the flashbulbs, the sound of applause. Then fade to present empty chairs, broken tape recorders, a file marked unresolved. The narrator continues, "Between 1995 and 2024, Oregon recorded 32 disappearances within 50 miles of Highway 58. 17 remain unsolved. Of those 7 occurred near known Ketterman sites. Investigators call it coincidence. Locals call it continuity." The camera pans through the forest again, police markers, long washed away evidence tags hanging like dead leaves. A new voice joins the soundtrack, a young student journalist, Maya Chen, recording her podcast Unfinished Frames. Her narration overlaps with old police audio. "I grew up on these stories," she says. "My mother worked at Sacred Heart Hospital, the same place Laura Haynes left the night she disappeared. When I was 16, I visited the forest. I thought it was just history. But when I developed my photos, there was one extra shot I didn't take. Just fog and a faint outline of someone holding a camera." The film cuts to the image she describes, grainy, unclear, yet the outline looks familiar, a woman's short-hair detective's stance. Maybe it was a trick of light, Maya says on audio, or maybe she's still doing her job. The final segment returns to the archive room. Rain lashes against the windows. June Reynolds boxes up the remaining evidence. She pauses over one envelope labeled "Do Not Scan." Curiosity wins. Inside a Polaroid never cataloged. The picture is perfect, almost too clean. The forest again. Two women standing side by side, smiling faintly. Torres and Vasquez, both facing forward alive, clear, untouched by time. A single, handwritten caption at the bottom. "Thank you for keeping watch." Reynolds stares at it, unsure whether to call her supervisor or a priest. She locks the photo in a drawer. The camera lingers on the label she writes across it. Evidence active status unknown. The film's closing narration plays over shots of Oregon's coastline at dusk. The ocean swallowing rain headlights, tracing the highway, a Polaroid camera left on a roadside fence post pointing nowhere and everywhere. Maybe the case was solved, maybe it never will be, but in every photograph there's a little borrowed timelight captured from something already gone. For nearly 30 years, the Oregon cold case has been less about death than persistence, a story that refuses to stop developing. Thunder fades into the click of a shutter. The screen turns white for a moment, as if a flashbulb has gone off inside the theater itself. Then, darkness. A line of text appears. Case file hash 47 status pending review. And below it, smaller, almost hidden in the static. Some stories never end, they just wait for light. The forest sleeps beneath another curtain of fog. No sirens, no tape. Only the soft hiss of rain through pine needles, the sound that began it all. A figure moves between the trees, a man in his 60s shoulders, bowed under a parka camera bag slung across his chest. The documentary cinematographer, last one left from Echoes in the Fog, has come back alone. He says he needs one more establishing shot. No one knows he came. He sets up the tripod in the same clearing where Laura Haynes vanished, where Torres disappeared, where Vasquez followed the trail to its end. The light is gray, perfect for ghosts. He speaks quietly into his recorder. Final note, reel 47. The site remains unchanged, ground erosion minimal. Temperature 42 degrees. I can't hear anything but rain. He raises the camera, focuses on the tree line. Through the lens, mist coils like breath from a sleeping giant. The focus drifts tree trunk shadow and then catches something pale, a shape, human, still. He adjusts the zoom. Two women stand side by side. At first he thinks it's a trick of light fog sculpted into memory, but the viewfinder stays sharp. They're there. Maria Torres and Elena Vasquez faces calm eyes, steady the faintest trace of a smile. He lowers the camera. They're gone. The forest holds its breath again. He presses record anyway. Subject cited. 0600 hours. His voice shakes, but keeps steady rhythm like a metronome against fear. No physical contact, visibility limited. He takes one Polaroid for evidence. The flash bursts white, bleaching the rain. When the print slides out, the image is blank. He waits. Slowly outlines form. Two silhouettes, yes, but now there's a third figure behind them, reaching toward the lens. He drops the photo. It lands face up in mud, the developing chemicals bleeding like watercolors. Later inside his van, he listens to the audio he just recorded. For the first few minutes, only rain. Then another voice joins, female, distant, almost whispering through static. "Stop recording!" He freezes the tape, rewinds, plays it again. The same voice, closer this time. He looks at the Polaroid under the dashboard light. It's dry now. The third figure is clearer, coat cap, camera raised. Someone photographing him. He turns off the recorder, starts the engine headlights carving through fog. The road out curves past the old Evergreen Motel, its sign still flickering. As he drives by, one window glows red as if a darkroom lamp has just switched on. He doesn't stop. Months later, editors in Portland assemble the footage for Echoes in the Fog, the Final Cut. They catalog every reel. The last tape labeled Reel 47 unnumbered arrives with no return slip. When they load it into the monitor, the timecode jumps erratically, 1995, 2015, 2024, flickering like a heartbeat. At first, the frame shows only trees. Then the image shifts to the cinematographer's van parked at dawn. The door opens. He steps out holding his camera. He looks directly into the lens, confused. "Who's filming this?" he says. The screen glitches, static. Then the forest again empty. The editors exchanged a glance. One laughs nervously. "Could be a double exposure," he says. "Old film." They keep watching. The next frame freezes on a single Polaroid pinned to a tree. The caption written in steady hand, "Thank you for developing." The projector bulb burns out with a pop. When they replace it and replay the footage, the reel is blank. Outside, Portland rain taps the studio windows. A courier arrives with one final package, soaked and unmarked. Inside an envelope. Inside the envelope, a photograph. It shows the editing room from moments ago, the two editors leaning over the monitor, the light of the projector flaring behind them. Neither remembers hearing a shutter. They turn the photo over. No date, no caption. Only 3 fingerprints in dried mud. The documentary never airs. Funding pulled, files sealed under state request. But weeks later, a short clip surfaces online, 38 seconds of handheld footage shot in darkness. A woman's voice whispering, "If you're watching, keep the light steady." Then a flash, then silence. The clip ends with the title card that once closed every Torres briefing. Case hash 47 status active, and so the story loops one last time. The rain keeps falling. The forest keeps its secrets. And somewhere in a drawer that no one dares open, the final Polaroid continues to develop slowly, softly, like the sound of breath between heartbeats. When it finishes, it will show a single image, a camera pointed straight outward, its shutter half open, as if waiting for someone somewhere to press record again.